Well, I'm sure you're all looking forward to hearing from Janet. There was a lot of interest in our discussion last week about the Constitution, so we decided we'd have Janet come up. She was on the Constitutional Committee, and she is going to give us an overview of what the Jefferson Constitution, it's a rough draft still, but some of the ideas that were floated around, and we did work with Chris Ann Hall for a couple of days on the Constitution. She went through it with a fine-tooth comb, so without any further notice, let's bring up Janet. All right.
I want you all to notice the bag in which I brought my materials. It's a State of Jefferson bag. I'm a teacher. I have to have visual aids. No, got it. Okay. There is an old Asian Indian legend of 6 blind men and their introduction to an elephant. So each of these 6 learned men of Indostan perceives the animal in his own limited way. The first man leans against the elephant's side and decides, oh, this elephant is very much like a wall. The second man feels the tusk and declares, no, the elephant is like a spear. The third man takes the squirming trunk and determines that the beast is like a snake. The fourth man reaches out, touches the knee, and is convinced that, no, this elephant is like a tree. The fifth man feels the ear and announces that the elephant is like a fan. The sixth man seizes the swinging tail and proclaims that the elephant is like a rope. And so these 6 men of Indostan dispute about their unique opinions and argue about an elephant that none of them has seen. So this is the problem that faced the Constitution Formation Committee for our new state of Jefferson. And that problem is that we had never seen a state of Jefferson. And that problem faces all of us today. What does it look like? What should it look like? None of us has ever lived in a state that follows liberty. We don't know what that looks like. We are grabbing onto the tusks, the legs, the tail, the trunk of the elephant and trying to make sense of it all based on our unique ideas, our perspectives, our experiences, and our hopes. And we are desperately trying to figure out what does freedom look like? What should it look like? But we're lucky. We are not blind. We are only blindfolded. A line from one of my favorite movies puts it, we have braces on our brains. We have 2 primary advantages in seeking our quest. First of all, we're not blind. Second, we have a standard. We have an example. Our founding documents tell us what liberty and freedom should look like. They are our guide. They honor the rights of life, liberty, and property that are the basis of all the decisions that we make about what our elephant looks like. Therefore, tonight, we are going to examine what freedom looks like through the lens of the State of Jefferson Constitution. Let's think of this in a visual that all of you can relate to, and that is a cupcake. I like cupcakes. How many of you prefer the cake part to the frosting? How many of you love that frosting? The cake is just some way to carry the frosting around. Well, most of the cupcakes that you get come in a little paper liner. So let's consider that that little paper liner is the Constitution. It holds everything together. Now we get the batter, and we pour the batter into the paper liner, but what good is that batter before it's baked? Well, some people like to eat raw batter, and that's great, but it really is kind of hard to manage. So let's consider that batter to be the government. And it is contained, shaped, formed, and limited by that paper liner Constitution. And once it has gone through that baking, that forming, that curing process, it turns out to be a pretty good thing. Unless you put too much of that batter into the paper liner. And if the batter, the government, exceeds the limits of the Constitution, and you put it in the oven, and it rises and it overflows, and it gets all over the rack and the bottom of the oven, it's a mess. It doesn't work unless it's contained by the Constitution. Now, where does the frosting come in? Notice that that frosting is not a part of the batter, and it is not contained by the Constitution liner. It exists on its own, and it's on top of it all. And it's the best part. I think so. That frosting, that ooey gooey, sticky, delicious, best part of the cupcake is our rights. It exists even if there is no liner, even if there is no cupcake, we can still have a big glob of ooey gooey frosting rights. I can carry them around in my hand. I can keep them in a bowl. They exist separate from the cupcake. They just make the rest of the cupcake better, and they make it work. They are not contained by the constitutional liner. They are separate from the government, and they're on top of it all. So this is what we are trying to do with our Constitution. We want a Constitution that limits the power of government, contains its authority, and makes it accountable to the citizens who created it. What we want is a government small enough, remember that cupcake, to be contained within the Constitution, that liner. Well, this is the State of California Constitution. How big of a government can be contained within this Constitution? A really, really big one. Too big. And that's the problem in California. Whoa, I'm dropping everything. No, I'm sorry. I've got it. Okay. Here is the State of Jefferson Constitution. It is 32 pages long. How big of a government will fit inside this Constitution? A very small and limited one. And that's what we were after when we decided to make a Constitution. now that I've dropped everything. We have dealt with the frosting before. We have talked about the rights, and our Constitution begins with a Declaration of Rights, and they are enumerated, and they are numerous, and there are more than 10 of them. So our state rights actually exceed the rights delineated by the federal Constitution, and there is a reason for that. We wanted to pin them down. But because we have dealt with those in the past, tonight I want to deal with the cake part of the cupcake. And that is the formation of the government under our Constitution. So we're going to be looking specifically at the 4 branches of the Jefferson government as created by the Constitution. Oh, wait a minute. Did she say 4? Is she wrong? I think she's wrong. I think she made a mistake. Legislative, executive, judicial, and constitutional review branch of government. And we will talk about that. Now, obviously, this is not the most glamorous part of the Constitution. We'd all like to sit around and talk about the right to bear arms and the right to speech, and we get excited about those because that's the frosting. But we've got to have that cupcake forming the basis. So we're going to talk about that cupcake. What we tried to do with these departments is provide vital accountability from our government. That is the most important of the protections that this Constitution can provide. Accountability. It is in these departments, these 4, where the government is nailed down, controlled, and kept from usurping the power of the people. So, it has to be a government small enough to fit within our little tiny 32-page Constitution. Let's start with the legislative branch. What have we done to make sure that the legislators and their purposes and their actions make them accountable to the citizens, which is their job because they represent us. Remember, we and our rights are the frosting, and that cake sits underneath us. Well, first of all, representation is the ultimate goal. So, who are our representatives going to be, and how many of them will there be? In Jefferson, we would love to have it about 2,500 people for every legislator, but that may not work. It may be a dream, but we would certainly like to have it somewhere between 1 representative for every 10 to 15,000, probably ideally around 12,000 people, which means where I live up in the Intermountain area of eastern Shasta County, there would be 1 representative for the towns of Bernie, Fall River, MacArthur, Montgomery Creek, Round Mountain, which is far better than what I have now, which is a representative who lives in Big Valley, Beaver, and represents everything down to Sacramento. So that is not perfect, but it is practical. Each representative will represent a district, and each district will be contained within a county. There will be no multiple county districts, and every county will have at least 1 district. Therefore, you will be very likely to see your representative at Safeway, or waiting in line at the bank, or in the car next to you gassing up at the service station. This will not be a person with the name Ted Who that you have never seen. If they're going to represent you, you'd better know who they are. and where they live. I know where you live. The Senate, we would love to see a return to the old federal model in which there is one senator per county. That is the only way that makes sense and that gives fair representation. Term limits, a big discussion. Do we limit them? Do we not limit them? A couple weeks ago, I was here talking about the ultimate person, the ultimate way in which we can stop people from lying on the ballots. And I said that that responsibility was yours. It doesn't matter what mistakes, what lies are put on the ballot. It's up to you to know what's going on so they can't fool you. Well, we agonized over this on the Constitution Committee, and ultimately, we came up with the idea that you are intelligent, responsible people, and you will be in charge of term limits. If you like your representative and that representative is doing a great job for you, then you keep voting him in or her. If you don't like that person, vote him or her out. You are the term limits decider. Why should a constitution tell you for whom you can or cannot continue to vote? You're intelligent. You're informed. You know how you want your government to be, and therefore, it's your responsibility to make sure that you get the government that you want. The next thing that we want that legislature to do is be part-time. We don't want professional legislators who start out in the California Assembly, and then after they've been there a couple terms, they move up to the Senate, and then after they term out in the Senate, they run for the federal House of Representatives, and then they move on to the federal Senate, and by the time they're 78 years old, they've done nothing but suck off the public teat. We don't want that. We want a citizen legislature. So the legislators will meet every year for 90 days, 3 months. And 1 year, the even-numbered years, they will pass legislation. The odd-number years, they will formulate a budget. They will leave their jobs. They will go to wherever the capital of Jefferson is going to be for 90 days, and then they will go home to their jobs. They will not be given a salary. They will be paid per diem for the time that they spend away from their homes. We do not want them to think that this is their job. This is their duty. This is their volunteer. It is not their career. Each legislator will be limited to proposing one law per legislative session. That means every other year they can propose legislation because they're only going to be legislating on the even number years. Now remember that fourth branch of government that I talked about? Any bill that is proposed, before it can go to the entire legislature for consideration, has to be cleared by the Constitutional Review Committee. And the Review Committee makes sure that it has a nexus to the State of Jefferson Constitution, that the legislature actually has the authority to deal with that issue. It has to have a title that clearly describes the issue discussed in the bill. And there has to be a statement of how much it's going to cost. If those three things are determined not to be present, it doesn't go to the full House. It doesn't pass the Constitutional Review Committee, it dies right there. The bill has to be public for 14 days before any consideration can take place. We can't keep them a secret. They're your bills. They affect you. You have the right to know what's going on with them. They have to be read publicly in the House on 3 separate occasions. Once, and the bill can address only one issue. No riders, no sneaky stuff, no things thrown in the middle of the night. And once that bill has been approved by the Constitutional Review Committee, it cannot be altered. Nothing can be added, nothing can be taken away. If there is any addition, it dies right there. It's no longer valid. We do have a system now in which our legislators take an oath of office. They have to raise their right hands, swear to uphold the Constitution of both the federal government and the state government. They don't know what in heck they're talking about because most of them have never read not only the federal Constitution, which is relatively short, but I guarantee you they haven't read this one. Or understand it. It is just an abomination of a constitution. It's a joke. So here is a part of the accountability. If you take an oath, that means you swear. You are promising. What happens if you break your promise? What happens if you swear and then don't follow through? Well, they have a word for that in the criminal code, and it's called perjury. You've violated your oath. And people who violate oath of office can have charges brought against them by us, and those charges are taken to the Constitutional Review Committee. And if you are found to have violated your oath, to have lied, then you can be held not just civilly responsible, but criminally. You can go to jail. We have to have accountability. If there are no penalties for violating your oath, why bother to take an oath? It's meaningless. If you're going to take an oath that you're going to uphold 2 different constitutions, then we'd better know as voters how well you understand those 2 documents, among others. And therefore, we will have all legislators required to take a test based on those constitutions and other documents. Now, in the case of elected officials, the government does not have the right to tell you which ones you can vote for. So, any elected official, we can't set a passing score, but we can make publicly known what the score is for each official running for office. Just as you have to give a financial statement to run for office, you will have to have your Constitution score made public. So if you got a 22% on your Constitution score, the people can vote for you if they want, but that leaves you pretty much hanging out there for violation of your oath if you don't know what was in that Constitution you swore to uphold. Now, in the case, and we will get to this later, in the case of appointed officials, anybody who is hired, they will also have to take an oath of office, and they will have to pass the test by a certain score, or they will not be hired. We can determine who we hire. We just can't determine who you want to hire by voting for them. Executive branch. It will consist of the following officers for the state of Jefferson, and you will notice some variation from what you're used to. There will be a governor, a secretary of state, a treasurer, an attorney general, and a superintendent of higher education. Now, notice that there was no lieutenant governor. What a waste of time and money. What does he or she do? You can't even tell me who the lieutenant governor of California is. I would be willing to bet that there's not a person in here who can give me her name. Now, here's something else different. These 5 officers will be elected by an electoral college, not by popular vote. Remember, we are not a democracy. We are not 2 wolves and a sheep voting on what we're going to have for dinner. We are a republic. And when I look at Placer County and Butte County and some of the larger counties, I don't want to trust my vote to their dense population. So therefore, we will have an electoral college for these 5 offices. That gives the smaller counties more of a say in who gets elected, despite what the Democrats are trying to feed you now about, oh, that electoral college is just so old-fashioned, let's get rid of it, it doesn't mean anything. Let's just go by the popular vote. Yeah, said by the people in New York City, Los Angeles. The function, the powers, the duties of the executive branch will be allocated among and within a maximum of 20 departments, not the approximately 500 that are in existence now. If it will not fit well into one of the 20 departments that will be formed by the legislature, perhaps it's not a function that needs to be taken care of by government. What a concept. There are things that government should not be doing? Oh my gosh, sounds like Jefferson to me. These 20 departments will also have restricted powers. They will be prohibited from establishing fines, fees, penalties, property confiscation, or usurping legislative functions. Those are all the jobs of the legislative branch through the passage of laws. You remember that legislative branch that's controlled by you? You get to decide fees, penalties, property confiscation, fines, that sort of thing. It's not up to some departmental bureaucracy. This is just an aside, but it's so egregious that I must mention it. I hope you are aware of the California Air Resources Board. Yeah, especially if you have a truck, a diesel truck, you know about them. And Mary Richards, is that, huh? Nichols, Mary Nichols is in charge of the Air Resources Board. She is a viper with long hair. She's awful. Did you know that the California Air Resources Board is incorporated? It is not a governmental agency. It is an incorporation incorporated in the state of Delaware. Who's from Delaware that you know? Joe Biden. Joe Biden's son, Hunter, has been on the California Air Resources Board of Directors. The Judicial Department, their job is to guard the rights of the people. We will have a Supreme Court, and that Supreme Court will also function as an appeals and an impeachment court. The legislature will establish district courts throughout the state as they are needed, and any other courts will be established by the legislature. All justices will meet the requirements of the Attorney General. And the Attorney General must be admitted to the practice of law in the Supreme Court of the state. Well, what exactly does that mean? This requirement of what it means will be determined by the legislature, and it may mean that that person has served an internship, they may have been to law school, they may have done private study, and they may, determined by the legislature, in some way proved their knowledge of law. Because in the state of Jefferson, there will be no bar certification requirement. We do not want the Bar Association to tell us who is going to be in charge of our courts. It's up to us to determine who is qualified to read the law in the state of Jefferson. Now, it may be that you want someone from the bar, but I hope that that is not your guiding requirement. Judges will be limited to a 10-year term. We do not want them to be career. We want them to be volunteer. So they will be limited, but why? Why limit a judge but not a senator? Because you don't vote for the judge. It is not an elected position, and therefore it must be limited. The Office of Constitutional Review, it ensures integrity in our new government. It ensures that all legislative proposals are constitutional. The Constitutional Review Committee will hear complaints of violations of oaths of office. It will make sure that all bills have a title that matches the content, that it matches a constitutional authority, that it does not violate the federal Constitution, and that the annual cost of the bill has been accurately determined. Now, you can tell by the strictures of these 4 departments that you are going to have a lot of responsibility in the running of our new government. It's going to be up to you to determine who you want to represent you and make sure that person is doing an adequate job. It is not the job of the citizen to sit back and say, well, I hope they do it right. Really ticks me off when they don't do it the way I want it done, but I'm pretty busy. Well, I'm working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, and I don't have time to read all that stuff that they send me. I don't know who my senator is. I don't know who my representative is. I think somebody else will take care of that until I get really annoyed, and then I'll gripe. We had a person run for a position of Board of Supervisors this year, and she ran unopposed. That is tragic. Unopposed. Now, I'm not being critical, but it wasn't because she did such a crackerjack job that everybody was happy about her. It's that they couldn't afford to run against her. Well, we need to work together to make sure that we do find someone to run, that we support the people that we want to run. It is our job as citizens, it is our responsibility to make sure that we have the government that we want, not necessarily the government that we deserve, which is too often the case now. Mark Twain said the government is merely a servant, merely a temporary servant. It cannot be the government's prerogative to determine what is right and what is wrong, and decide who is a patriot and who isn't. It is the job of the government to obey orders, not originate them. And that is what we have tried to do in these 4 departments, is hold that cupcake within its paper liner so our frosting on top is safe, tasty, and as high, abundant, and fluffy as it can possibly be. Thank you. And I would be happy to answer questions.
Okay, here you go. We got one back here.
Hi, Janet.
Hello.
I've got one question and one comment. On the Constitutional Committee, did we say how they were going to get into office, their seat? Are they going to be elected? They're going to be appointed?
The Constitutional Committee?
Yes.
Oh, the
Constitutional
review. It is within the dictates of the Constitution. There's a whole section. I did not want to bore you with all of the details about how they're appointed and who gets to do it and who does it, but it is all in the Constitution. And some of them are appointed from one place and some from another place, and we tried to make it from a variety of sources, yes.
Okay.
But I hope you all understand that I will be the leader of the Constitutional Review Committee. It's my job, yeah.
Okay. And secondly, is there anything in there about not allowing someone to run for one office while they are holding another? In other words, can't run from a safe seat?
Yes, there is. And we will get into this in another session when we talk about the elections, but there are also restrictions on donations for campaigns. So that's restricted too, yeah.
And one comment too is that, remember, this is a rough draft.
Yes.
This is not the concrete thing, and some of it sounded like it was really what it is, but there is actually the Trinity County group for a year has gone through this line by line. They're on Article 9. And I had some questions, even one from Mark Baird today. It says memberships. The Office of Constitutional Review will consist of the Secretary of the Constitutional Review plus a panel of 4 individuals. The Secretary shall be elected by the electors, which means the Secretary gets elected by the folks. So that's going to be a paid position. It's going to be a full-time position, right?
As I envision.
Okay, so
Again, what Terry is saying, this is the vision of a group of people who took the rights of life, liberty, and property and tried to translate that into the cupcake of a structured government.
Well, then it says that 4 of the panel members will be nominated by half from the Supreme Court, which should be 2, and half from the governor, which should be 2. Not from the same county or approved by the Senate. An at-large nomination will be sent by the House of Representatives for years opposite of the Secretary for approval by the Senate. This term of office for Secretary shall be 4 years, the same election cycle with the governor, and the terms of office for each of the 4 members will be 4 years and staggered every 2 years in odd years. The Secretary and the 4 panel members must fulfill the requirements of a state senator of the State of Jefferson. Compensation for all panel members will be determined by law. So the question that I got on that was, if it becomes the 4th branch of government, it's got to be an elected branch. If it's a 4th branch of government, rather than being maybe a subsidy of the judicial branch or the legislative branch, maybe the legislative branch because they make the laws. That was the question I had. So.
Yes. And now you can see why I didn't go into great detail. This Constitutional Review branch of government, as far as I'm concerned, is still in its very raw state. Chris Ann Hall looked at it, and she said it may be better dealt with as a process than a branch. So it is something that needs to be looked at. The concept is what we're thinking about primarily at this point. Another way to rein in the legislature and to make sure that your rights are abided by and looked out for. So by no means is every I dotted and every T crossed on that particular
Yeah, I
department.
think the thing she said was that who's going to oversee the people who are overseeing?
That's right. Who's gonna
And then the other
Who's
part.
gonna watch the watchers?
Then the other question that I got asked is that if we hire folks, or we elect folks for 90 days, and they work somewhere, what about the rights of their employer? Their employer hired them, they have them there, do they let these guys go for 90 days? They hire a person to come work for 90 days, and then when that person comes back to work, they fire the person they hired? And on top, so how does all that work as far as no compensation? I know Chris Ann said that she thought there should be some.
Yeah, Chris Ann disagreed with the Constitutional Committee, and she thought there should be compensation. And I can't tell you how it's all going to work out. For 90 days, it sounds like not long to me, but it would be an age to an employer who's paying someone for 90 days without the benefit of that person's efforts on their job. So I don't know exactly how it's going to work. But you do understand what we're trying to do is have a citizen legislature, not a professional one. So it may be that we, just like with jury duty, I was a teacher, so when I served on jury duty, the county did not pay me my jury stipend. They gave it to my employer. So maybe that's what we will do in Jefferson. We will not pay our legislators, but we will pay their employers. I don't know, just a possibility, a way of taking care of it. But some things are still to be determined.
I might get feedback. I'm close.
Oh.
Anyway, if you remember a few years ago,
Oh, no, I don't. I'm too
when
old.
Obamacare was submitted to Congress, it was over 2,000 pages, and Pelosi says we have to pass it to find out what's in it. And probably nobody read it before it was passed, nobody read it afterwards. Our country, for over 250 years, has been run by what's words in this little book right here. And I suggest that with the Jefferson Constitution, no law written will be accepted for the review by the Congress that has any more words that's in this little book right here.
Not a bad idea at all. I'm in favor of that, you bet. And when it comes time to approve a constitution for Jefferson, it is in the Constitution itself. It will be made public. You will have a chance to look at it. It will be voted on. This is not going to be like Nancy Pelosi, vote yes so you can find out what's in it. No, you will know exactly what's in it, and it will have gone through a lot of discussion and debate before it reaches that point. I'm not happy with everything that's actually in our Constitution. Some of the things that we put in there were compromise among many people. So I didn't always get my way, but I did not compromise to the point where I said, no, that's wrong. It was just a matter of, well, we can do it this way and we can do it this way, and we may find out some things don't work, and then we'll have to change them. So we know that we're doing something new and different, and it's not always easy to figure out how it's going to go.
I was really happy with a lot of the things that you talked about, and I know that there's going to be things that need to be altered a little bit, but one concern I have, my most concern, is the term limits. I'm really afraid to not have term limits.
And you're not alone. And we debated that one. But we decided to try to trust the people. It's your decision. You are in charge of term limits.
People can get apathetic, and
That is obvious, but if you are going to have a state of Jefferson that we envision, you can't be apathetic. And if you are apathetic, then you get the government that you deserve. But we deserve better. And boy, I'm telling you, we hashed around term limits, and I understand both sides, but I would like to give the people a chance to be the determiners of their own fate before we legislate away that right.
Well, wouldn't it be easier to err on the safe side than to err on the side? That's what we have now is people in there for 30 and 40 years, and they do just
But
get
remember,
rich.
we have term limits in California. How is that working? I don't see that it's working well.
One of the big things that
And just one more point. What is easy is not necessarily what is right. And we are not in this for easy. We are in this for adult decisions and adult responsibility. I do understand the arguments for term limits, but I would rather not make it easy at this point. Got a question back here.
Yeah, there's a safeguard, and it is this. You mentioned earlier that there's one representative for every 10,000 people. Now, wait a minute, that's a lot of representatives. Even at the federal level, we're supposed to have a lot more than 535, should be in the thousands. Now, think of the safeguard. How much money can Monsanto put out when they're buying off our legislators? When you got thousands of them, they got to come up with grease for each one that's susceptible. But that is one of the ways to stop people running in and out of office making money. Look at the Bidens, for Christ's sake. Look at them. We got thieves all over the place. At the state level, the county level, the federal level. Well, if you've got that many legislators, you can't, that's a big stop and go for term limits on themselves. Most of these people, I swear, either for ego or for grease. It's very few you find that want to do it out of the goodness of their heart to do something for society. So anyway, that's my piece. But that's the reason for so many legislators. You
Right.
can't buy them all.
You will be less susceptible to corruption when you are one of a larger number, and you will be less susceptible to corruption when you are not there for the entire year, but only for 90 days, and then you go back to your home territory and go back to your job. So that term limits, I know, we talked about that, we argued. If you can imagine screaming and yelling over a telephone where 8 people are part of it, we did not always agree and didn't always get along every Saturday for 3 hours for over a year. Yes.
Excuse me, Janet. I'm looking at a constitution right now, and there's a marked out on here, but it says no legislature shall spend more than or serve more than 12 years in legislature or run for a term they cannot complete by exceeding said term limit. That was marked out by Chris Ann.
Yeah.
And so I don't have the latest, greatest markup, apparently. We never got to Section 3, Article 3 of the Constitution in our review we were doing together.
Chris Ann is such a stickler for life, liberty, and property rights and abiding by the rights of the people, and she was not at all in favor of term limits.
Really? She says in her comments, might consider a shorter term than 12 years.
Oh.
It's in Article 3.
Yeah. Again,
I wasn't privy of your conversations you had with the others, but we didn't get to that in our Constitutional Convention. Folks, we started our Constitutional Convention reviews, and then we ended up in a lawsuit, and you know the story from there forth. So we kind of put it on the back burner right now till we get the lawsuit settled. So this is great information for us that you're hearing, but it's not finalized, okay?
yeah. And I have, I don't know, 5 or 6 different drafts of the Constitution because it has been hashed out many, many times.
and I want to kind of add on that too, because I do remember us going through that part of the term limit thing, and along with having a lot more legislators, So, and along with not used to these things. It's on. I'm just not using it properly. And so one of the benefits of also having so many legislators is that you got that kind of a check. But also having just your county means the cost of running for the seat is a lot less. So if your guy that you got in there is doing a crappy job, it's not going to take much for somebody who's not happy with him to put forth the efforts to get his seat.
And in a later section that I'm not covering tonight, the people who can contribute to campaigns is severely limited. So Merck Corporation in Washington, D.C. will not be able to contribute to the campaign of an assemblywoman in Shasta County. Yeah.
Shayla.
Regarding the appointment and office holders, did you go over any requirements for the holding office, like in terms of judges being appointed? Are there any age requirements, educational requirements?
Oh, well,
Things of that nature.
the educational requirements will be established by the legislature as to who can be part of the Supreme Court and what requirements they would have, and then all of the other judges have to abide by those. But there will not be a requirement that they be a member of the bar. So we do not want a bureaucracy of bar members in our judiciary. And there are age requirements and that sort of thing for legislators and judges, but they're in there, they may change. What I'm trying to do tonight is specifically look at not the nuts and bolts, the little minutia, but what applies to life, liberty, and property and protecting those rights.
Hey, Janet, quick question on the criminality that you were talking about earlier of office holder if they
Violation
violate
of the
their
oath.
oath. So you're talking about civil and criminal. So can you expound on that? So if somebody violates their oath, then what's going to happen next?
Civilly means that if you violate your oath of office and it injures someone, then they can sue you for the cost of their injury, whatever it may be. So that's a civil penalty. If it is a criminal penalty, you could go to jail. You violated a law.
So are you going to look at it both ways when those oaths are violated?
Yes.
And there's a chance that they could get a double whammy on both of those,
Oh,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Just like one of our former football players went to trial for a criminal charge and was found not guilty, but then the family sued him civilly and won millions of dollars settlement. So there are two separate ways in which you can be punished.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I had a question over here. I'd say red hat.
Oh,
There's a
okay.
few.
Waving.
Our representatives that we elect, do they have to live in the districts?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's in the
Maybe then
Constitution.
a suggestion is they can only get contributions from people who also.
Within their
or
district.
businesses that
Yes.
reside. Maybe
Yeah.
you already have that, but.
Yep.
And they won't cost as much to run for an elected office, will it?
No,
Okay, good.
because you will be in a confined area. I think of our recent Board of Supervisors elections. The District 3 Board of Supervisors covers an area that starts in Reading, in the Enterprise area, and expands outward in a pie shape and ends up in the Intermountain area next to Lassen County. That's huge. How do you contact that many people? It's not as if it's a downtown Reading where you just walk the streets and you can see everybody. These areas are so huge that they are unmanageable and unrepresentable. So we're trying to make smaller the size of districts so that you actually are within a district that has a limited number of people and a limited number of issues to represent them.
So are we looking at splitting the districts within the counties as well?
That would be up to the counties.
Okay.
Because under the Jefferson philosophy, the counties will be the most important decision-making body. It will not be the state deciding, it will be the counties deciding. The counties will have the money, the counties will dispense with the money. It won't be the state. In fact, the counties will be giving money to the state because the counties will collect it.
Janet, I have a procedural question. Once the Constitutional Convention, or whatever you call it, they agree on the Constitution, everybody agrees that that's it, how does it become the law of the land? How does it ratify to become the law of the land?
It will be ratified by the people. The Constitution will go back to the counties, and the counties will vote.
Got another one for you, Janet. Maybe not in the Constitution, but in rules, is it on? On the rules someplace, is there going to be something about curtailing lobbyists?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's in there. And sorry, lobbyists, you're not going to be welcome in Jefferson. Yeah. And what good would it do for a lobbyist to lobby if they can't give donations? Yeah, that they...
I'll answer that one for you. We had a supervisor in Alameda County that didn't technically violate the FPPC laws, because I know I turned her in, but when she left office, she was given a very cushy job.
That's true. And what we're trying to do is tie it down so that you know your representative and you can more closely watch for that sort of thing. We can't get rid of all corruption, but that was our goal, was to try to close off the loopholes wherever we could. If you want to be corrupt, there's a way to do it.
Let's go to California.
But it's up to you, the voter, to get the electorate as honest, to get the elected people as honest as they can possibly be. Yes?
Hi. Oh, sir, did you?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I can hear him later.
Thank you. So where can we view a rough draft copy, get our hands on a rough draft copy? Doesn't have to be official in
Yeah,
any way.
you know, at this point, we're really not passing them out because it would be a futile exercise in argument. It is not even near what it's going to be when we finish, and it would be very difficult for everybody to have a copy of something that isn't even, is even close to what it will end up being. Like Terry said, we have a group in Trinity County that's looking it over, and they've made 28 pages of suggestions for changes on a 32-page document. So that's why I'm here tonight telling you essentially the idea of where we're headed and what we're looking for and what we're trying to do. And it may not end up looking this way. So we're not letting it get out for that reason. And also, we're not letting it get out because we can't control who sees it. I trust you, but I may not trust the person that gets it from you. And I know that there are some people out there that I wouldn't trust at all.
So the original Constitutional Committee is not involved, or?
There was a committee. We had a constitutional convention a few years ago down in Live Oak, and people who wanted to be involved signed up, and I think there were 50-some people who wanted to be involved in writing the Constitution. And we started out meeting at central locations, and the 50-some people very quickly dwindled down to between 8 and 10, and we started meeting by telephone calls online. And that's how we did the majority of our work, was 3 hours on Saturdays for over a year. And people who were truly interested followed through. But everybody had the chance to be involved.
Could you, okay, second thing, could you comment on the executive branch? You didn't really say much about that, or is that for another night?
No, I did. The only reason that I didn't go into great detail is that the executive branch is not, as far as its jobs go, it's not going to be as powerful in Jefferson as it is in California, because in Jefferson, a lot of the executive functions will be at the county level, not the state level.
Yes, something I would like to see, both at the state and the federal level. I know a lot of you here have been in the military. Remember the bachelor officers' quarters? Remember family quarters? The big problem these legislators have when they make it to D.C. at the federal or in Sacramento is the cost of living. You're paying X number of dollars. As you know, some congressmen show up and they sleep in their office. They're trying to maintain a residence with their wife and kids, say in Kentucky or wherever, and then how are they going to live in D.C. on $68,000 a year? I doubt if that hardly makes a rent. So they're very, very tempted to take, let's say, payoffs. And how many of you remember seeing the films of, remember Boehner, running around, hopscopping around the assembly building or congressional building in D.C., handing out envelopes? Did anybody ever see that film? He's got an armload of envelopes running around handing them out.
It was
So-called
payoffs.
campaign.
Yeah, it was payoffs from corporations. Of course, remember that if we have the Jefferson that we envision, nobody will be too far away from the head, wherever the Capitol is. And the gentleman's question about the executive branch, I can tell you that we envision one of the jobs of the governor will be to be in charge of the militia, the state militia. Mm-hmm. So we're doing some things that are not done in California. Yeah, that was the whole idea. Well, that is the 4 departments, but there is a lot more to the Constitution that I have not even begun to look at, which will come at a later time, such as elections and establishment of things, and I had a whole list where I had to just absolutely stop. Education, you're going to be shocked at our vision of education, so some things have to be fed in small doses. Okay.
Janet, you did allude to the counties not giving in a sense, but forwarding some monies on to the state. Is there anything in there regarding what that would look like?
It is, and that comes in a later article,
Okay.
which I didn't want to get to tonight.
Okay.
Gets.
But it's going to be a lot better trade-off than what we currently are under?
We are looking at a dispersed power base, just as the original Constitution for the federal government looked at the states as their own power base, and they gave limited powers to the central government. So in Jefferson, we are looking at the counties as a source of power and giving limited powers to the state. So the power will not emanate from the state out to the counties. It will be at the county level and be funneled to the state for limited reasons. So it's a total shift in what it is now. Money will originate in the counties, and the counties will shift to the state the money that the state needs to function, not the other way around.
And there won't be any strings attached like there always is in California?
No.
Good.
No, because the state will not have the money to attach strings.
And we'll have to think like Jeffersonians instead of Californians, won't we?
It's very difficult. There's
Yep.
that big California box, and
Yep.
the ladder out of it is very high and very steep. Yeah. So practice climbing out of the California ladder, because the state of Jefferson is open wide. Yeah. But with it goes the aspect of responsibility. It's your responsibility to make it work, because it can't function with a placid populace that leaves the job to someone else.
You know, as I remember, the citizens of Red Bluff voted to be in the state of Jefferson. They're the only ones. And I suggested that the state capital should be in Red Bluff.
Oh, well, we've had that discussion, and we're trying to find someplace central to all of the counties, and it would be someplace nearby there. I do want to just go off point for a moment. I attended a 2+ hour town hall on Saturday involving New California. I suggest that all of you look into that very carefully. It is scary. And if anybody asks you about New California, tell them to approach it with caution. I could not, under any circumstances, recommend supporting New California.
And I want to double that idea.
Yes,
Are they having another meeting fairly soon?
I have no idea. They do not announce their meetings. They do not collect signatures to show public support. It seems to be run by one man, and one-man rule sounds as if, and I'm just using this as a comparison, an analogy, and I'm not in any way suggesting that the people involved are like these people, but it would be akin to kicking out Hitler and bringing in Stalin. What's the difference? Who is your leader if there is no representation and public input? So approach New California very warily.
How many people attended that event?
There were about 30, 35 max.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Was that just from up here?
It
Like
was
from
in
this area?
Reading. It was in Reading.
My understanding, it was at our old stomping grounds?
It was at the Eagle's Nest Church. Yes. And I do not fault the people who were there. They are looking for the same thing that we are. They want better representation. They want to be free from the dictates of California, which is destroying our lives, our property. They are looking for answers. I do not think New California is going to give them what they want. So look into it. I tried, and I did not find a lot of specific information except follow me, I know what I'm doing from one man. So be very careful about that movement. I don't see how we as Jeffersonians can work with them. I don't think that the leadership of New California is willing to work with anybody.
Janet, I want to thank you, and I think most of the people here want to thank you for all the hard work, and I know it's hard work that you've been doing for the last year.
Thank you. I appreciate your appreciation. It is a labor of love because I love my state, I love my family, and as I always say, when I get old and I'm no longer able to do anything, I want to tell my grandkids, this is what Grandma did for you.
Thank you, Janet. We truly appreciate all your work and effort in doing this for us. Looks like the party's over. Thank you, folks.